3:18 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The living room felt smaller than it should have. The gift sat between us on the coffee table, wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with a thin blue ribbon. I had chosen it the way I chose everything, without hurry, without noise. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, settling softly on the worn edges of the furniture. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. Jessica picked it up with 2 fingers and shook it lightly. Her mouth was already curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she laughed, "what am I supposed to do with this junk?" The word landed hard, junk. She glanced at her phone as she said it, already half elsewhere, as if my answer didn't matter. The ribbon slid loose, falling to the floor without sound. I noticed that more than her tone. How carelessly things fall when people decide they have no value. I didn't respond right away. I folded my hands in my lap and listened to the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, to a car passing outside, to my own breathing. Say nothing, I told myself. Listen. Jessica sighed, mistaking my silence for embarrassment. "I mean, it's sweet," she added, waving the package once. "But honestly, this stuff just takes up space." Space. As if space were something to be cleared, not held. I smiled faintly, not because I agreed, but because I recognized the mistake she was making. Some things don't announce their worth. They wait. And as Jessica set the gift aside like an afterthought, I felt something settle quietly inside me, steady, unmistakable. This wasn't just about a gift. It was about what she believed I was capable of. And that belief was about to be tested. 3:41 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Silence settled in layers. After Jessica's laughter faded, the room didn't recover right away. It rarely does after truth shows itself without permission. She stood and stretched slightly, already moving on. I remained seated, my back straight against the sofa, my hands still folded. The air felt cooler, though nothing had changed. I've learned that moments like this reveal more than arguments ever could. My chest didn't tighten. My throat didn't burn. What I felt was quieter, recognition. The kind that arrives when you finally understand how someone sees you. Jessica talked about errands, about traffic, about how busy her week had been. Her words skimmed the surface of the room without landing anywhere. I nodded when appropriate, not out of submission, but courtesy. Courtesy costs little. Attention costs more. She thinks I give gifts because I don't know better, I realized. She thinks memory is clutter. The thought didn't hurt the way it once might have. Age thins reactions and sharpens awareness. The gift still sat where she'd left it, partially unwrapped, exposed. I glanced at it once, then looked away. Objects don't need defending. Their value remains, whether or not someone recognizes it. Jessica lifted her purse near the door. "You should really stop holding on to old things, Mom. It's not healthy." Healthy. Another word people use when they want permission disguised as concern. I smiled softer this time. "I'll think about it," I said. And I meant something very different than she heard. Because what Jessica didn't understand, what she never bothered to ask, was this. I don't keep things because I'm afraid to let go. I keep them because I know exactly what they're worth. 6:18 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Memory has its own timing. When my husband passed 27 years ago, the house didn't grow quiet in a gentle way. It grew precise. Bills arrived when they always had. The boiler needed servicing. The fence leaned a little more each winter. Grief did not excuse responsibility, it refined it. I learned early how to measure what mattered. Envelopes labeled by year, receipts folded carefully, notes in the margins explaining why a choice had been made and when. Not because I feared mistakes, but because I respected the life we had built together. Care leaves traces when it's done properly. Jessica was young then, bright, curious. She wanted new things quickly and believed newer meant better. I tried to teach her patience, not restraint, but discernment. That quality lasts longer than novelty. She listened sometimes. Other times she smiled the way children do when they believe time will prove them right. Gifts became my language, not expensive ones, meaningful ones. Objects with stories attached, repaired rather than replaced. I believe knowing where something came from helped you understand where you stood. As the years passed, Jessica grew confident, successful, busy. She spoke of space and simplicity with the certainty of someone who'd never needed to choose carefully. I admired her independence. I did not mistake it for wisdom. What I never told her, what she never asked, was how much thought went into everything I kept. How value isn't always loud, how worth is often quiet, waiting. Sitting there after her laughter, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about taste, it was about perspective. And perspectives change, sometimes only when they're forced to. 8:41 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Red flags don't wave, they settle. Jessica didn't become dismissive overnight. That's what made it easy to excuse. Her tone shifted, first small comments wrapped in humor, opinions offered as jokes that landed heavier than she seemed to notice. "You and your old things," she'd say, laughing lightly. Or, "Mom, people don't keep this stuff anymore." I told myself it was generational. Tastes change, language evolves. Let it pass, I thought. Peace often asks you to ignore the first signal. Then came the glances, quick assessments when she entered a room, drawers opened a little longer than necessary, shelves examined as if inventory were forming quietly in her head. She began asking questions that sounded casual but felt calculated. "Do you still have the boxes? Where did you put the papers? Is this insured?" I answered honestly. I always had. Transparency felt like trust. She started offering help sorting, organizing, modernizing. She spoke about efficiency the way people do when they believe order belongs to them. "You don't need all this," she'd say gently, already reaching for something I hadn't offered. When I hesitated, she smiled. "Relax, Mom. I'm just trying to help." What unsettled me wasn't the action. It was the assumption behind it. At a family gathering, she laughed again, louder this time, holding up a gift I'd brought as proof of my stubborn attachment to the past. The room went quiet. I said nothing. Silence has weight when you let it. Pay attention, I told myself. This isn't about clutter. It was about control disguised as concern, about deciding value without asking permission. And once I named it, I couldn't unsee it. The gifts weren't the issue. They were the test. 9:18 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The first betrayal wore a smile. It happened at the dining table, sunlight pooling across the wood my husband had refinished himself years ago. Jessica arrived with a box, my box, without asking. She set it down between us like a favor already completed. I went through the spare closet, she said lightly. You weren't using any of this. Inside were the gifts, not junk, not clutter. Pieces I had kept carefully wrapped and labeled. A silver brooch, a set of cufflinks, a small painting with a cracked frame. Each one had a history. Each one had a reason. You moved my things, I said. My voice stayed level. She waved a hand. Mom, relax. I'm helping you declutter. No one wants this stuff anymore. No one. The word landed hard. She lifted the brooch and laughed. This? What am I supposed to do with this? The room went quiet. I felt the old reflex rise, explain, justify, soften. I didn't. Silence can be instruction, my husband used to say. These were meant for you, I replied, in time. Jessica's smile thinned. Well, time's not on their side, is it? There it was, not impatience, dismissal. She slid the box toward me. I'll donate it if you want, or toss it. Either way, it's not worth much. I closed the lid gently, aligning the edges. My hands were steady. Leave it here, I said. She shrugged, already standing. Suit yourself. As she walked away, I sat with the box and felt something settle. Clear, unmistakable. She hadn't just mocked the gifts. She'd decided their value. And in doing so, she crossed a line that didn't belong to her. 10:07 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The second betrayal hid behind concern. Jessica returned that afternoon with coffee I hadn't asked for and a tone she reserved for difficult conversations. She set the cup beside me and pulled out a chair, sitting too close, as if proximity could pass for care. I've been thinking, she said, about the future. The future, I noticed, had become her favorite word. You're holding on to things that don't really serve you anymore, she continued gently. It's not healthy. You should simplify. Simplify. Another word that sounds kind until it's applied to people. She opened her phone and began scrolling. I found an estate buyer, she said. They specialize in old items, sentimental pieces. You won't get much, she added quickly, but at least it'll be handled. You contacted someone about my belongings, I said. For you, she corrected. I knew you'd put it off. I looked at the coffee untouched steam thinning into the air. When did help start arriving without permission? She leaned back, crossing her arms. Mom, you don't even remember where half this stuff came from. I met her eyes. I remember all of it. Her smile flickered just a second. Enough. That's not what I meant, she said. I just don't want you to be overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word people use when they want authority without asking for it. She stood, already finished. I'll set a date, she said. We'll go through everything together. Together, I thought, means your plan. My silence. After she left, I walked to the spare room and opened the cabinet she'd mentioned. The gifts were still there, carefully wrapped, exactly where I'd left them. I touched the box once, lightly. This wasn't about clutter. It was about control, tested softly, patiently. and I could feel the pressure building towards something final. 3:26 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The breaking point arrived disguised as efficiency. The appointment appeared on my calendar without my handwriting. Jessica hadn't mentioned it. She didn't need to. She believed momentum could replace permission. The note was written neatly, confidently. Estate review, 4:00 p.m. I sat at the kitchen table. The clock ticked louder than usual. I waited. When the doorbell rang, it wasn't Jessica alone. Two strangers stood behind her, well-dressed, polite, already assessing the room. "This won't take long," Jessica said, stepping aside. "They're just here to evaluate." Evaluate, as if my life were an inventory. One of them glanced toward the cabinet. "These are the items?" he asked. Something tightened, not in my chest, but lower, steadier. "I didn't agree to this," I said. Jessica sighed, impatience showing. "Mom, don't be dramatic. This is practical." Practical again. Always practical when the person losing something isn't the one deciding. She turned to the men. "Some of these pieces may have value," she said casually, "but honestly, they're mostly sentimental." Mostly. I noticed how easily she minimized what she didn't understand. One of the men reached for a box. My voice stopped him. "Don't touch that." The room went quiet. Jessica looked at me as if seeing resistance for the first time. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "I'm trying to help you move forward." Forward, I realized, meant out of the way. I stood slowly. My legs were steady. "You're not helping," I said. "You're deciding." Her jaw tightened. "Someone has to." That was it. The moment patience ended and clarity took its place. I gathered the boxes myself and closed the cabinet door. "This ends now," I said, not loudly, not angrily. "You don't get to plan my life." Jessica stared at me, stunned. And in that silence, I understood something clearly. She had assumed I would always step aside. She was wrong. 5:11 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Aftermath settles. Quiet determination takes root. After they left, the house felt larger, not emptier, clearer. The air shifted as if something heavy had been removed without anyone announcing it. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum, the late afternoon traffic outside, the ordinary sounds returning to their proper volume. Jessica didn't speak as she gathered her coat. She paused at the doorway, waiting, perhaps for an apology, perhaps for retreat. I offered neither. "I'll call you," she said finally. I nodded once, not agreement. Closure. When the door closed, I locked it. The click was small, precise. It steadied me. I carried the boxes back to the cabinet and arranged them carefully, the way I always had. Each object returned to its place, not hidden, not displayed, simply respected. They are safe, I thought. So am I. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened the old ledger I'd kept for years. Dates, receipts, appraisals folded neatly between pages, notes written in my own hand, explaining when something was acquired and why it mattered. I hadn't kept records out of suspicion. I'd kept them out of habit, out of care. Now, habit became preparation. I made one phone call, then another, short conversations, no emotion, just facts. When I hung up, My shoulders lowered on their own. I wasn't angry. Anger rushes, then fades. What I felt instead was resolve, steady, patient, unyielding. If she wants control, I thought, she'll have to meet the truth. Outside, the sky dimmed. Inside, everything aligned. And for the first time since the laughter, I slept without rehearsing answers. Because I had decided something important. I would not explain my worth. I would prove it. 8:42 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Preparation begins quietly. Morning light settled across the desk as if it had an assignment. I brewed tea and sat down with the ledger open, the steam curling upward, patient. Preparation doesn't rush, my mother used to say. It arranges. I began with the simplest things. Receipts matched to dates, appraisals clipped behind photographs, letters from dealers and estate offices, polite, precise, written years ago when discretion still meant something. Each item told the same story in a different voice, origin, ownership, care. I called the appraiser first. He remembered me. That mattered. We scheduled a review without ceremony. Then the attorney, someone I trusted because he listened more than he spoke. I didn't tell him about the laughter. I told him about the assets, about the records, about the boxes. Bring everything, he said, and bring your notes. I smiled at that. Notes are where truth keeps its shoes. By late morning, I labeled folders, blue for provenance, green for valuation, yellow for correspondence. The colors steadied me. Systems respond to order. Jessica texted once, "We should talk." I did not reply. Conversation is a tool. Today, documentation did the work. I paused at the cabinet and lifted one small box, lighter than it looked. Inside, the velvet lining was worn smooth where fingers had returned it again and again. I closed it gently. Not sentimentality, context. At noon, I wrote a single line in the ledger. Formal review initiated. No flourish, no commentary. Outside, church bells rang the hour. Inside, I felt the alignment complete. Facts in sequence, voices identified, timing set. Let them assume. Assumption is loud. Proof is patient. And patience, I knew, was about to speak. 11:18 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The turning point gathers. The conference room was smaller than I expected, quiet in the way rooms become when decisions are meant to be recorded. A narrow window faced the street. Winter light filtered in, thin but honest. I placed the folders on the table and waited, hands folded, breathing even. Jessica arrived late, not rushed late on purpose. She smiled as if we were meeting for lunch, not for clarity. "I don't see why this needs lawyers," she said lightly, setting her phone face down. "We can talk like family." Family, I thought, is not a substitute for facts. The attorney entered and nodded to us both, then opened his notebook. He did not ask how we felt. He asked what we brought. That mattered. I slid the folders forward, one by one. He didn't open them yet. "Before we proceed," he said, "I need to confirm something." He looked at Jessica. "You've represented these items as having negligible value, correct?" Jessica laughed softly. They're trinkets, old things, sentimental at best. Trinkets. The word hung there, thin, dismissive. The attorney turned to me. Mrs. Langford. I met his eyes. They are documented assets, I said, with provenance. He nodded once and opened the first folder. The sound of paper was loud in the room. Dates aligned, names appeared, seals caught the light. He moved to the second folder, then the third. His pace slowed. Jessica shifted in her chair. "This is unnecessary," she said. "You're overcomplicating it." The attorney looked up, calm. "On the contrary," he replied, "this simplifies everything." He reached the final page and paused just long enough for the silence to work. "There's an addendum," he said carefully, "one that changes the scope." Jessica leaned forward. "What addendum?" I folded my hands and waited. 11:26 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The reveal becomes undeniable. The attorney turned the page with care, as if the paper itself deserved respect. "This addendum," he said, "was filed alongside the original inventory." His finger rested on a seal, raised, official, unmistakable. Jessica frowned. "That doesn't make sense. I've never seen that." "That's correct," he replied. "It wasn't provided to you." He read silently at first, eyes moving, posture changing. Then he looked up. "The items in question are not personal gifts alone," he said. "They are part of a documented collection held in trust, appraised and insured over time." Jessica let out a short laugh. "Appraised? Those old boxes?" The attorney slid a single page across the table. "Independent appraisals," he said. "Multiple years, verified provenance, auction comparables." The room felt smaller. "These pieces," he continued, "include early American silver, signed studio ceramics, and limited-run prints with established market demand." He paused. "Current estimated value places the collection in the high seven figures." Jessica's laugh did not return. "That's impossible," she said, voice tight. "She never said." "I never needed to," I said quietly. "Silence is not secrecy," I thought. "It's discretion." The attorney nodded. "Additionally, the trust specifies custodial control remains with Mrs. Langford. Any attempt to dispose of, transfer, or diminish the collection without written consent constitutes breach." Jessica stared at the page as if it might change its mind. "There's more," the attorney added. "The addendum names a beneficiary adjustment should a breach occur." He closed the folder. "Which brings us to consequence." I did not smile. I didn't need to. The truth had finished speaking. 12:03 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. The room hears the truth. The conference room filled gradually, an appraiser, a trustee, two witnesses requested by counsel. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Sunlight cut through the tall windows in narrow bands, settling across the table like lines drawn for order. Jessica sat rigid, her confidence replaced by stillness. Her eyes kept drifting to the boxes stacked neatly near the wall, the same ones she had laughed at weeks earlier. Now she traced the labels, dates, initials, catalog numbers. The laughter had nowhere left to land. The appraiser spoke plainly. No flourish, no judgment. "These items were cataloged over decades," he said. "Condition preserved, documentation consistent, Market value verified. The trustee added, custody was intentional. The trust language is specific. Jessica leaned forward, forcing a smile that didn't hold. This is being blown out of proportion, she said. They were just gifts. They were entrusted, the attorney corrected calmly. There is a difference. I stood then, not because I was asked, but because it was time. The room quieted without instruction. I placed my hands on the table, feeling the cool surface steady me. I gave those pieces with care, I said, not to impress, not to explain. I gave them because they mattered, and because I trusted the space they were entering. I looked at Jessica briefly. Mockery doesn't change value, I said. It reveals misunderstanding. No one interrupted. The attorney concluded, voice even. Given the findings, the trust provisions activate immediately. Papers were signed, witnesses nodded, a process completed. As the room began to move again, I remained still. The confrontation had not required volume, only clarity. And clarity, once spoken, does not ask to be believed. It stands. 4:18 p.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Consequences settle into place. The consequences did not arrive loudly. They arrived the way paperwork always does, methodical, irreversible, indifferent to emotion. Notices were issued, access adjusted, roles clarified. What Jessica had assumed would remain flexible suddenly became fixed. She stood near the window as the trustee explained the changes, arms folded tightly across her chest. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic lights changing, pedestrians crossing, ordinary life continuing. It made the room feel smaller, not intimate, accountable. So I'm cut out? Jessica asked, her voice sharper than she intended. The attorney replied calmly, you are no longer a decision maker for these assets. Distribution will follow the trust as written. As written. The phrase carried weight. Jessica laughed once, short, hollow. This is unbelievable, she said. Over some old things? The trustee answered without hesitation. They were never things. They were holdings. Silence followed, not awkward, final. In the days that followed, the social shift was unmistakable. Family conversations recalibrated, invitations adjusted. Jessica's certainty, once assumed, never questioned, no longer traveled freely. Authority, once withdrawn, rarely announces its absence. It simply stops being deferred to. That evening, I returned home and unlocked the door myself. The familiar click grounded me. Inside, everything waited exactly as it always had. Books on shelves, boxes in place, sunlight resting along their edges. I placed the trustee's letter in my drawer and closed it gently, not as a record of victory, but as confirmation of balance restored. Some downfalls come with apologies. Others come when the room stops rearranging itself around you. And this one, I knew, would not be undone. 6:36 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. Healing arrives without ceremony. Morning light filtered gently through the curtains, settling across the floor in quiet patterns. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea warming my hands, listening to the house wake up, The faint hum of the refrigerator, a bus passing somewhere down the street, the steady tick of the clock above the doorway. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt guarded. For weeks my body had carried tension I hadn't consciously chosen. Shoulders tight, breath shallow. Even rest had required effort. That morning something loosened, not suddenly, naturally, as if my body had finally received permission to stand down. I thought of my late husband, not with sorrow, but with clarity. He believed preparation was a form of love. That care did not need to be loud to be effective. The gifts my daughter had mocked were never meant to impress. They were meant to endure. Sitting there, I understood that more clearly than ever. I moved slowly through the house, touching familiar things: the back of a chair, the edge of the bookshelf, the lid of a small wooden box I had kept for decades. Each object felt steady, patient, unchanged. I hadn't lost my place here. I had only been reminded of it. Later, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence. Not evidence, not instruction, just truth. I am allowed to keep what I protected. Healing didn't arrive as relief or celebration. It arrived as balance, as the quiet certainty of belonging restored without explanation. I closed the notebook and set it aside. The conflict had ended. What remained was living on my own terms, without apology and without fear. 7:12 a.m., New Haven, Connecticut. What remains after justice is quiet. The day began the way most honest things do, without announcement. I stood by the front window and watched the street come alive, a woman walking her dog, a delivery truck slowing at the corner, light shifting gently across the sidewalk. Life continued, uninterested in what it had taken me years to learn. For a long time, I believed dignity meant endurance, that love required swallowing disappointment, that keeping peace meant making myself smaller so others could feel large. I understand now how incomplete that belief was. Dignity is not silence forced upon you. It is silence chosen, kept until the moment truth needs no decoration. My daughter laughed at what she didn't understand. She saw clutter where there was legacy. She saw sentiment where there was value. But worth does not announce itself loudly, and truth does not beg to be believed. It waits and it lasts. I returned the remaining documents to their place, not hidden, not displayed, simply where they belonged. They no longer felt like protection. They felt like closure. What needed to be proven had already been seen. What needed to be corrected had been corrected. I stepped outside and felt the cool morning air against my face. The house behind me stood firm, not because it had been defended in court, but because it had always been anchored in care, patience, and record. Things that do not disappear simply because someone mocks them. If there is anything this life has taught me, it is this: age does not erase value. Quiet does not invite dismissal. And what you protect carefully will speak for you when you no longer need to explain. I walked forward into the day without carrying anything extra. That was my justice, and that was enough.